Hi there, you're listening to the Estranged Heart podcast, and I'm your host, Kreed Revere. Welcome back to our returning listeners, and if this is your first time here, thank you for selecting this podcast to listen to. As we begin today's episode, I invite you to grab a cup of coffee or tea, settle in, and listen with an open heart. But first, the regular disclaimer. I am not a licensed therapist or counselor. Nothing within this podcast should be considered or taken as therapy. If you are in need of therapeutic support such as counseling, please seek out a therapist near you. Hi there. Today's episode is a conversation between myself and AC Bergen-Fischer, and there are no quotes for today. There are no announcements. We're just going to dive right on into the episode. I hope that you will listen with an open heart and take in the nuggets of wisdom and perhaps listen to it a second or third time as well. We cover a lot of different things in this particular episode, and I think there are a lot of little nuggets of wisdom throughout this episode, and you might find a few more if you go back and listen to it a second or third time. So yeah, on to today's episode. How can we bridge the need for space, the need for no contact, with an explanation? Or has an explanation been given and not honored, questioned, so on and so forth, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I guess it's kind of a tough thing, because I mean, if I'm going to be honest and think about like my personal experience, I can't blame my mother for the fact that she didn't hear my explanations that I offered before leaving, because there's two parts of communication, right? I mean, there's the words that I choose to express, and there's the words that you receive. If you're not receiving the message I'm sending you, then it doesn't matter how articulate I've been, right. I haven't communicated. And from your end, if I tell you something and you don't recognize it as a desperate plea for change, you haven't ignored that desperate plea. It's been invisible to you. And I think maybe there's a strong probability actually that I'm guilty of having done that with my mom in the past. And especially when you couple that with like the typical parent-child dynamic. I mean, it doesn't matter if your child's like 40 or 50 years old. There's still that habit that develops in childhood where it's like, I don't like what you're saying, I'm going to storm out of the room and slam my door behind me. And we do that, maybe not like literally anymore, but figuratively we certainly do, by blocking on Facebook. We stop answering calls, whatever.
Yeah. And you've prompted some thinking for me, because maybe it's not just a blanket, I'm walking out and I'm shutting the door, right? I try to talk to parents about listening and different perspectives and trying to understand the reasoning, why human behavior, why do we do the things that we do? Why are our children choosing estrangement versus sitting down and having a quote unquote adult conversation? And I hear this often from the parents. They're adults now. Why can't we not sit down and talk as adults? And I try to help them to understand, because there will forever and always be, as you just said, the relationship between a parent and a child, regardless of ages, regardless of maturity, regardless of what have you. And because of that, there's that power differential. So there will always be that dynamic at play on some level for most relationships, right? But how do we together as parents and children come to a place of trying to understand the other person before taking such drastic measures. And I don't know that that's possible.
From my perspective, it almost seems like it would be easier from the parents' end. And that may just be because, like, something hard that I don't have to do is easy for me, right?
Right. Right.
But I think about, like, okay, like as a parent myself, I've got two kids. One is 21, the other one is 15. And I think about when the 21-year-old was younger, and I started thinking about, okay, like, when is an appropriate time to have conversations about sex, about drugs? When I started reading about suicide statistics in teens, like which sort of things should I be watching for? And it wasn't like I was dealing with a child who was, from my understanding, at high risk of like getting into drugs or promiscuous sex, or I should say not promiscuous, dangerous sex,
Right.
because sex is sex, whatever.
Right.
Um, or somebody who was like suicidally depressed. I didn't see any of these things at play, but I needed to be vigilant because I know that these are the sorts of things that, like, if I can help my kid through, if I can walk with them through it, then I do well to educate myself in the potential risks. And I'm almost wondering now, like when you're dealing with like kids that are getting older, I mean, the time for the birds and the bees talk is over.
Right.
You're not worried necessarily so much about teenage suicide or drug abuse or these kinds of things, but you realize that, like, family estrangement, statistically speaking, is at least as big as these other problems.
Right.
And even if we think we've got great relationships with our kids, maybe we should be watching for certain types of things, making sure that we do preventative maintenance, have conversations like, hey, like just a reminder, like I remind my kids all the time, I don't want to end up estranged from them one day.
Right.
And maybe I'm doing it wrong, I don't know, time will tell, right? But I remind them, it's like, you can talk to me about anything. If you've got something, like, no matter how damaging or hurtful you think it's going to be, I can't promise to agree with you, and I can't promise to like what I'm hearing, but I can promise to react calmly and rationally
Mm.
and invite you to continue communicating until such time when you are done. And I won't respond until you invite me to do that. If it's a case of you need to get something off your chest, you want me to sit there and shut up, I can do that too. Like, whatever you need, I will do it. I don't know, like, speaking from the kid's perspective, if there's something as powerful that can be done.
I agree. I don't know that there can be. Um, because, well, when we get back to the root of the problem, right? Why is the estrangement happening? There's a breakdown of communication. There's typically, what I hear from adult children is, I've talked, quote unquote, I've talked till I'm blue in the face, and they never listen to me. I don't feel heard. I've tried multiple different ways of saying, putting up my requirements, if you will, in order to have a relationship, which has struggled in some form or fashion. I tell my clients, you're here because you're estranged. If you had a healthy relationship with your adult children, your likelihood of estrangement is very slim, right? So that means that something has happened to break down that relationship. And generally it's some sort of communication. And that space that we all come from, of seeing things from our own perspective and not being able to look at the other person. So if you have a child, as you're talking about in this case, it's not generally the parent that has the problem with the child, it's the child that has the problem with the parent. So it's the parent that holds that power to be able to make an effective and massive change, more so than the child. Not to say that it can't be done. You're proof of that, right? But I think that the parents have this responsibility and this power structure to be able to make the bigger shift. for the kid. And I know that a lot of parents don't want to hear that.
This is why I've often said over the years that I think as podcasters, we actually have it pretty easy because we record our conversations on a variety of topics with a variety of people. Sometimes we just record ourselves talking. And when you have a recording of a conversation or a monologue and you put that sort of in a save folder somewhere and you don't get to it for a while, when you come back to it, you're coming back with a fresh perspective, fresh ears, and you're getting the closest thing to another person's version of your words as possible.
Right.
And in my experience, more often than not, I started understanding like so clearly like how I was misunderstood in different situations. Like, you know what, in my head it all made sense. I was speaking the truth. I wasn't being a jerk. I was this, I was that. I was like, the crowd carried me off on their shoulders. I was the hero.
Right.
And when I listen with like fresh perspective with zero context, I've forgotten what my headspace was when the recording started. And I realized, okay, maybe there was a lot of room for misunderstanding here. So like, whereas we can't expect that every parent and child dynamic is going to end up recording their conversations.
Right.
I think if we approach these unrecorded conversations with the understanding that no matter how much sense we think we're making, chances are we're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And no matter like what our intent was, the received message has a lot more to do with the situation than the sent message.
Correct. Did a podcast episode several weeks ago now at this point, on impact or intent versus impact. Right. And that is exactly what you're talking about. We can have an intent to get a point across or an opinion or whatever, and how it lands is how it, the impact, what is the impact of it, how it lands and how it's received. So yeah, we can't always know that. And where do we find the grace to be able to entertain someone else's perspective? Why is that so difficult? Why is that so difficult? That's what I mean, I know from my own perspective, pre-estrangement, I was set in my ways. And it was, as I've talked about before on the podcast, when I raised my girls, it was my way or the highway. So I wasn't interested in entertaining anyone else's perspective other than my own. And when did that begin to change? For me, that began to change when I got into therapy and started actually talking through my stuff, talking through my experiences, talking through messages I was getting from other people, talking through my interpretations of those things and my perspective. So, but how does that change for someone who doesn't go to therapy? How did that change for you?
I think in a way, maybe I sort of like started giving myself therapy, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Because I had an argument with my ex-wife one time, and she said, like, I don't like the way you communicated XYZ, whatever it was. Mm-hmm. And in the moment, I thought, like, she's being a real hag here. Mm-hmm. Like, why is she, I know where I was coming from. Why is she being like this? Why is she doing this to me?
Right.
And I said, like, that's not what I meant. And she says, I don't care what you meant. I care how you sounded. And again, I thought she was being really nasty in the moment. And like, I don't know why. They just like, maybe it's like part of the way my mental health challenges manifest. I will turn things over and over and over in my head mm-hmm. until they start to make sense. And right. I kept getting stuck on this comment she had made. And I realized that, you know what? I didn't mean it. As much as that is like just about everybody's go-to excuse or explanation, it's meaningless and it's worthless. Nobody gives a shit what you meant. Nobody.
Right.
Except you, right?
Right.
And the other thing I got stuck on like right away, which I've spent a lot of years now like turning over in my head, is that um sorry, my mind just jumped the track. You know what it's like being in your 50s?
I do.
Is that like, these excuses that I make for myself, I need to be just as willing to make them for other people as I am for myself, right? Like, so if I approach a situation and I think, wow, so and so is being unreasonable, like, why aren't they considering where I'm coming from? Why aren't they considering what kind of day I've had? Why aren't they considering that I was abused as a child? Blah, 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 blah.
Right.
If I'm being honest, I'm not considering any of these things about them either. I'm considering my feelings, whether their feelings are hurt or my feelings are hurt. My priority is my feelings, which isn't fair.
Right.
And, and to get stuck on these questions of, well, why are they doing this to me? That's one that comes up so often. Why are you doing this to me? I realize that that's a garbage question. You know what a better substitute for that is, though, and the one that I've like forced myself to swap in. Sometimes it takes a lot of conscious effort. Like, it doesn't come easily.
Right. Right.
Is instead of saying, why are you doing this to me? I ask myself, why are you reacting this way?
Exactly.
And almost always that ties into something totally unrelated to the immediate situation or the person I'm looking at.
Yep.
And just like those 3 points alone, like without therapy, if you just take a minute and just like, you don't even have to tell anybody what your thoughts are, just meditate on it a little bit. If you're at all honest, there's adjustments that are going to have to be made.
Right. Right. That is so on point. And it's on point for the post that I made today on the Estranged Heart Facebook page and my own personal page, about attending a graduation that you've not been invited to as a parent. And why is your reaction what it is? Why do you feel the way? And this is trying to get parents to turn from that outward focus of you've done this to me, meaning the child, asking that question, why did you do this to me? Why are you doing this to me? Those types of things. And instead turning it around to, why am I reacting this way? Why am I having this strong response that I'm having, versus just an average response, right? I'm not expecting anybody to not be human. That's my dogs. I'm not expecting anyone to not be human. We are all going to have responses, but it's to the degree that we have them that can run things amok, right? And cause all sorts of other things.
And I would think anybody too who's like adjusting their way of thinking to not put too much pressure on themselves to have like a wonderful and healthy initial reaction. Because if I'm going to be like totally transparent, which I try to be, my knee-jerk initial reactions are typically fairly terrible. Like, at least inside my head, I can be a real garbage person. But it's what comes after that matters, like sometimes I've literally got to bite my tongue to keep from saying the first thing that pops into my mind. Sometimes I got to take a walk. Sometimes the conversation got to be on pause. And sometimes, again, I just come out with the most wonderful thing as my initial response. Like, it's anything and everything.
Right.
But, like to your point, like leaving ourselves room to be people, to be human, it's totally okay. There's nothing wrong with you for struggling.
Right.
We're all struggling.
Right. Yeah. And that's one of the things that I work so hard on with my coaching clients, with my moms, especially, well, even the adult children that I work with, because they are on the other end of the spectrum, being really difficult and hard on themselves for feeling guilty of having made this decision, and what is it doing to the family, and what am I doing to my kids, and things like that. And we're not going to get anywhere as far as making amends, repairs, reestablishing trust, having effective and healthy relationships if we are running ourselves through the ringer because we're simply human. We
Yeah.
can't do that. It's not effective.
Well, and it gets me thinking a bit too, like, you think about like, why do these things break down? Obviously, like, in ineffective communication, that's a big thing.
Right.
But I think unrealistic expectations of a situation and unreasonable boundaries. These are both things that are like, I think the other big pieces of the puzzle.
Agreed. That unrealistic expectation is profound. I have to say that my relationship with my girls today, I really don't have expectations of what our relationship looks like, will look like, what they will do, how they will present in the world, all sorts of things. I don't have those anymore. And this is bringing up something new for me too. I wonder if that is, I can't say that it was a conscious thing. It wasn't something that I consciously set out to do. It has happened. And I wonder now if it has happened because out of maybe fear of, if I have any sort of expectations, I'll be let down. Or is it out of, this is where we're at in our relationships. They're free to be who they are, and I'm free to be who I am. And however that rolls out, that it rolls out that way. Does that make sense?
I think it does. And I think like another possibility may be that for some people in some situations, it's easy to abandon the expectations when you don't know what you should expect.
True.
You're not going to invent an expectation. It's a case of, look, this is uncharted territory.
Right.
Out of necessity, I have to take things as they come.
Right.
It's unfortunate that we can't start there, with everybody.
Right. Right. Where do those expectations come from, do you think?
No, and I'm looking at unhealthy expectations. I think unhealthy expectations, I'm not a trained professional. I can only speak for me.
Mm-hmm.
For me, they come from unfortunate experiences. Like I've heard it said that the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior.
Mm-hmm.
While I don't think that is a healthy approach necessarily, more often than not, it seems to be true.
Right.
And if my experience with you is that, in this type of situation, you're going to be unfair, you're going to be nasty, you're going to gaslight me, then I think moving forward, before these types of situations even arise, I'm going to expect, there's no point approaching Kreed on this level because she's proven that she's going to be this and this and this. And even like, if you throw me a curveball by being a totally decent person, mm-hmm. I'm still sitting there subconsciously waiting for the other shoe to drop, I think.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. I agree with that. And I think that's where the kids are at. I think the kids are in that space of this. This is how mom or dad have always reacted, right? This is what I have come to expect, right? So this expectation of, if I do A, they do B, right? Mm-hmm. Kind of thing. And so this brings a question that I've been wanting to ask you, and I never get around to it. How do you think, for those parents who are doing the work, when I say doing the work, working on themselves, really trying to look at this whole estrangement thing, not as a punishment, but as a, wow, this was an unhealthy relationship. and what do I need to do to get back on track and to make it healthy moving forward. For the parents that are doing that, and their kids who have um these expectations that mom will never change and mom, isn't going to do the work or what have you. And so they've put up these boundaries that are no contact. How does a parent let the kid know that there's been a shift and a change, and that they're actively working on these things, that they're really trying to make and do things differently?
See,
How do they do that?
this question actually hits really close to home
Okay.
because I was very, very fortunate that during the longest period of estrangement from my mother, my older sister still had a relationship with her.
Hmm.
And she also had, my sister did have a relationship with me. And while she wasn't like sort of like getting in the middle of the dispute, she was getting in the middle of the resolution. She would encourage my mom
Mm,
to see things from my perspective. She would remind me that my mom was doing certain work, that she was going through changes when, you know, I know I've told my story more or less on your podcast before, so I won't get into the details, but I mean, long story short, my mom wasn't completely cut off from me because she did have that indirect way of communicating that, you know what, I'm not the person that you parted ways with like 6+ years ago. Now, I'm a couple of years into a very, very now healthy relationship with my mom, to the point where we are each other's confidants. We love each other like beyond words. We've developed a keen mutual respect, and just enjoying the most wonderful mother-son relationship imaginable. I'm getting to watch my mom look at the relationship, or the estranged relationship between her and my younger sister, who remains no contact with our mother, and this is going on for almost 8 years now.
mhm,
And while I understand my sister's, I don't want to say her need, her perceived need
mhm,
to maintain that distance, because I mean, the family dynamic that she left, it was unhealthy, like with our nuclear family, but that family dynamic is no longer the same, because I mean, my
mm,
mom, my sister, older sister, and I, we've all done a lot of work to get away from that.
right.
Our mother has done an incredible amount of work. I mean, she's still her.
Mhm,
She hasn't prostituted her personality in any way to go
right.
through these changes, but it's like she's learned how to function more effectively. Unfortunately, my younger sister has no way of seeing that, because she's not only cut herself off from our mother, but from anybody else who might potentially be the bringer of good news.
Mm,
So I mean, I normally like to encourage people that, hey, like there is like a clear and distinct way forward here. I think in this case, there's nothing you can do to control that other person, unfortunately. All you can do is work on you, in the hopes that when and if your child does give you an opportunity, you can demonstrate to them that that wasn't a mistake on their part. Like my mom and I have talked a lot over the last couple of years. I mean, she gets quite upset sometimes, just, oh, we're so close now. We wasted so much time.
mm, right.
And I hear that from parents fairly frequently. It's like
Yep.
all this time is being wasted. And I always remind my mom, what, we didn't waste that time. We spent that time. We spent that time working on ourselves. Even if we had never
Yes.
reconnected, that would not have been a waste of time.
Yes.
So I mean, if I can offer anything of value to these currently estranged parents with difficult or impossible kids, you're not wasting your time. Being a good person it's a reward. It's a bittersweet reward. It's a painful experience. I can't imagine being separated from either of my kids.
Right.
Like, that's the worst thing I could possibly imagine. But we don't have control over other people as much as we would like to sometimes, and the more we try to assert that control as a desperation move, the
Right.
more we cement the estrangement.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Agreed. I agree. Do you think that there is the, well, I think I know the answer to this, but I'll ask it anyway. Do you think that there is the chance that kids are not wanting to reach out because the hurt and the pain has been so intense? The feeling of not being seen and heard and listened to and acknowledged in a way that isn't a quote unquote parenting move of I'm the parent and I know better and I know best and I know you more than you know yourself kind of thing. Did they just get to a place where they're like, I'm just no longer interested in even slightly cracking that door open to even see if there's a potential change? Do you think that happens?
It absolutely happens. There, it takes it exposes us to a lot of risk when we reach out to an estranged parent on any level, directly or indirectly, because like you say, that hurt, it's happened a lot of times. Some of us, like, like I used to say a lot of times while I was estranged from my mom, where like my ex-wife or my sister or my friends would say, well, like, that's your mom, like, why don't you just give her a chance? And I would just say, like, my shields can't take another hit.
Right. Right.
Like, I'm barely limping through here, and it's like I'm still functional, and for the sake of the people that depend on me, I have to remain functional. I don't have the option of being obliterated emotionally in a way that I can't bounce back from. And as much as I think from the parents' perspective that may look like a really selfish move, it's actually kind of selfless, because I'm giving myself to my wife, I'm giving myself to my kids. I'm sort of like, I'm deprioritizing my own nuclear family BS, because like there's people that they're my responsibility too.
Right.
I mean, I'm my responsibility, sure, but like underage children, like,
Right.
grandma is optional, dad is not.
Right. Right. Right.
So there's that component. I think the other component too is, now that I'm talking, that's usually when my gray matter starts going. um I'm almost wondering if, as adult children, we don't figure out how to be adult children when relating to our parents, because we're so used to being like children.
Correct.
And the example that pops into my mind is, I think about like, one of my ex-girlfriends. She was estranged from her parents for a lot of years, and even though I was currently estranged myself, I mean, our estrangement stories were very different. Our reasons, I mean, there's similarities, I guess, too, but for the most part, I think philosophically we had really parted ways on like why we were remaining estranged from our parents. And one of the things that had constantly come up with her was that the things that she couldn't handle with her mom specifically had to do with, like, I think that as the adult child, her not realizing that, you're no longer obligated to obey your parents.
Right.
You're no longer obligated to ask permission.
Mm-hmm.
You do have the option of respectfully putting a conversation or a situation on pause.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the option of saying, you know what? You are entitled to your opinion, but you are not entitled to an audience.
Say that again.
You are entitled to your opinion, but you are not entitled to an audience.
Beautiful.
This is a sticking point, like, not just limited to estrangement, like anything to do with life.
Correct. Yep.
We've all got opinions, but nobody's obligated to hear us or understand us, right?
Right.
And so, going back to the dynamic between an estranged adult child and a parent, if that adult child is still thinking in terms of like a child adult dynamic, I think a lot of the time they're likely to act out in childish ways.
Right. Agreed.
And I know it's difficult for parents. I mean, I'm a parent of a young adult right now.
Mhm.
It's strange for me to think that this kid, it seems like yesterday I was changing his diaper, and today, like, he's a fully functional human being.
Right.
My mind hasn't completely caught up with that, but like I gotta forcibly remind myself. I think, like, yeah, that is a challenge for the parent, but I'm almost wondering if that's like a bigger challenge for the kid, because I mean, no matter how old I get, I mean, I'm 50 years old right now. My mom is turning 81 in June. I mean, we're both like well-seasoned, mature adults, but I mean,
Mhm.
she's always gonna have that like 30-year head start on me, no matter how
Right.
old we get.
Right.
I'm always gonna be this punk who's 30 years younger than her, from her perspective and from mine.
Right.
So if there's an answer like how to shake off that ugly part of the dynamic, I don't know what it is, but maybe it's something to look at.
I think it's very much worth looking at. I like to, when, as you were talking about this, I was thinking, to a time when I first moved to Washington, um, and my two oldest grandchildren were a year and a half old and 6 months old, and they remained in Florida, and I of course was in Washington. And I remember for like the first 6 or 7 years that I was here, every time I thought of them or referenced them, I thought of them as a 1.5-year-old and a 6 month old, regardless of how old they were, 6, 7, 8 years old, right? In my mind, that's where they were at. I was still, I had this image in my head of them being a year and a half old and 6 months old.
Yeah.
And it didn't dawn on me until very recently, this revelation. I was like, oh my gosh, this is wild. And I think this ties into what you're talking about. We as parents get into this place where this kid is always the kid, not an adult, right? And if we have to shift our thinking, I'm always talking about going from that manager role that we play as a parent to a child, and managing, making sure they're getting their homework done, and they're going to school, and they're taking baths, and they're doing all the things, right? We're managing them as children. And then they get into adulthood, and we don't ever stop managing, which is, I feel like, a lot of the issues and struggles that we can have, in and end up in estrangement because of this, because we're so used to giving our opinion as we would when they were really young, and managing and doing all the things. We haven't caught up with the fact. We know chronologically that they are 50 years old, but our minds and our hearts haven't caught up with that yet. And I think that plays into this. So I just wanted to offer that as a story of how we can be looking at our children without recognizing that's how we're looking at our children, our adult children, right? That
So
they're no
you've
longer
mentioned a
this.
couple of times being a grandmother.
Mhm.
Do you think that, like, as a mother, if you borrowed from the grandmother toolbox, it might be a little bit easier sometimes dealing with adult children?
Absolutely. A million times over. A million times over. Oh my gosh, it's so, I've thought of this. I have thought of this many, many times. I'm like, oh my gosh, my relationship with my grandkids is so, and I hear this from other grandparents, is so freeing. And that is for myself as well as for them. I have zero expectations of what my grandkids should be, what they should be doing, not doing, any of those things. It's just really a free moment. I was with my granddaughter today, one of my granddaughters today, and she's 2, and she's just doing her thing. And there's so many times that I sit back and I think, look at this kid. Look at how amazing she is. She's just doing her thing. She's not worried about what I'm thinking or the other person down the road's thinking, or, oh, I should be over here doing this at this age, because I'm 2 years and 3 months, or whatever the case may be, right? She's not the least bit concerned with that. And as a grandparent, I roll with that much better than I did when my children were kids. And being able, I think if we could as parents take from that toolbox just that alone, allowing our children, our adult children, to exist and be with freedom without our input and expectations, I think we would have a vastly different world. Vastly different
Because
world.
when you talked about that managerial role, it's sort of like what jogged the question for me, because I mean, with grandkids, you're retired
Right.
as a manager, right?
Yes.
But I don't know that there's like a milestone moment when you're dealing with an adult child where you realize, okay, like I'm done raising you now. I mean, they're always going to be your
Right.
kids. You're always going to
Mhm.
care. You're always going to have concerns, questions, input that you would like to offer,
Mhm. Mhm.
but it's not your job.
Right. Well, it's interesting because and this is another point when and I'll use this example. My youngest daughter just recently um ended one job and is starting another one 1st of May. And as she was going through the interview process, she was talking to me about this, and she would say, well, I had this interview, and then I checked back in with her, several days or a week later or what have you. And she'd be like, yep, they offered me the position, and but they wouldn't give me what I wanted for salary. And mom, Kreed, was like, and she'd say, so I turned it down. And I'd be like, what is she doing? Like, take the job. Like, hello, you were offered a job. I'm in utter freak out mode. I don't do this in front of her, right?
Yeah.
But that was the point where that was like, that's moving from that manager role where pre estrangement, I would have said those things. I would have said, what is wrong with you? You've been offered this wonderful job with these great benefits. And so what? They don't give you the extra $5 an hour that you want. Just take the job. Now I'm very much the consultant. I come in, how's the job hunt going? Well, they offered me a job. They didn't give me what I wanted for a salary. And I'm like, great. So what's your next plan? What's your next step? Right? Like, I'm curious. I don't make an opinion about things. I don't know that I would have shifted into that from that manager role into the consultant role had it not been for estrangement. I don't know that I would have. And that is one of the reasons why I'm grateful for having had my estrangement experience today, because it gets me as close to that grandparent toolbox with my own kids as I can get as a parent of an adult child. Does that make sense?
Oh, that makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah. It really, and I hear parents talk about that a lot. My kid, they did this and they made that decision and they decided on this, and the parent is just so upset about it. And I think to myself, but it's not your life. It's not your life. Your kids aren't coming to you for the most part and telling you, and if they are, it's the same thing applies to them. It's not their life. But for the most part, the kids aren't coming to you saying, you should do this, that, and the other thing, right? It's your life. You get to make those calls. You get to make those decisions. So when does that change? I think that for a lot of parents, that begins to change. If it had not already, I think it begins to change when they get married. And there's another person involved. A lot of parents will back off at that point in time.
Somebody else's problem now.
Right. Right. For one, yeah. That's one way to look at it. But I think that is kind of a natural evolution if you will,
Fair
into
enough.
that. But even with that, I mean, we all hear the horror stories of the mother-in-laws, right? Like the horrible mother-in-laws being nosy and all of these things. So it doesn't always happen. But I think when we can, and what is that from? Here's another thing to think about. I mean, we're kind of all over the map today, and I love this. I love that we've
Hmm.
just gone from one thing to another to another. Here is another aspect to that, in that when you have, I'm trying to formulate my thoughts and I can't get it together. Shoot, we'll have to edit this part out. I lost my train of thought there for a minute. It's gone. It's that 50 thing. Although I'm 54, so I've got four extra years on you for this.
So it doesn't get better moving forward.
No, no, it doesn't. Damn it. It's gone. It'll come back just as soon as we stop recording. Well, shoot.
That's funny though. You're talking about mother-in-laws and how horrible they can be, and maybe I was just doing marriage wrong. I've been married and divorced twice, and I have to say, my mother-in-laws, I love them so much more than my wives. They were just like both such agreeable people, and I don't know how they managed to raise such nincompoops for daughters.
I don't know. Maybe my sons-in-laws would think the same thing. Because I'm not one of those mother-in-laws that meddles and gets in the middle of stuff, and I really don't. And I think my kids appreciate that. I think my sons-in-law, I don't know how they feel about their wives, so I don't know. I get big hugs when I go over generally.
Well, that's
My sons,
something.
my daughters are like, they kind of do the side pat every now and then. I'm like, okay, it's one of those days. My sons-in-laws just come over and give me. But anyway, well, that's, shoot, I don't know where I was going with that, the mother-in-law thing.
That sucks because I feel like you were like really going somewhere awesome.
I know.
But you weren't far enough in where I got any hints to help you along the way.
Yeah, I know. Shoot. Oh well, but we'll have to make a note to pick up. Oh, it's gone. I've had
It's
just
like
a little bit on
really
my
good
plate.
mixed bag stuff today. Like, this is
I
awesome.
know.
I think
Yeah.
it's good because like estrangement, like, well, it is moment to moment. It is a mixed
Mhm.
bag. It's not like you're sitting there thinking, well, today I'm going to focus on um the unhealthy boundaries I've set with my so and so. It's like
Right.
it's a whirlwind, a roller coaster. It's like everything terrible all at once.
Exactly.
So I,
Yeah,
I think we can afford to be a little ADHD in our approach.
I think so. I like it. I really do. And I think, I mean, yes, there are going to be some people that are not going to like it. We're not going to please everybody.
Well, we don't make this for them, do we?
That's right. That is right. But there will be people that really will appreciate this. And I think that, and this is part of my struggle, is that I get going with estrangement, like in a lot of my support groups and stuff like this. And it goes from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, because there's so much wrapped up and involved with estrangement. It's just not any one thing, and not any one experience, across the board. It's so different for everyone. So I think it's beneficial. I think we can lead by example in a lot of ways for a lot of things. So
100%.
this brings this episode to a close. I hope that this time together was time you feel well spent, and that you are able to find some takeaway nuggets to help you on your journey, wherever you may be on your estrangement and reconciliation path. If you feel you've received something helpful or positive from this podcast, please consider following us, sharing this podcast with others, leaving a positive review, perhaps entertaining becoming a guest on our show, or following us on social media, on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok under the same name, The Estranged Heart. As a reminder, there is an online support group on Facebook. If you are a estranged mom who identifies as being spiritual and approaches estrangement with a sense of curiosity rather than blame and judgment, and desire to do inner self-work and reflection, please seek us out. We can be found at facebook.com/estranged mothers support group. And lastly, if you are an estranged parent or an estranged adult child and would like to have your story shared on the podcast, anonymously or not, please reach out to me via email at theestrangedheart@gmail.com.